All right. Hi, everyone. Today we're going to be having the speaker panel that we've been talking about for the past 2 days now, right? So yeah, I think we can just get right into it. So obviously you guys all know me. My name's Hiroshi Ghosh, or Yoshi, and I'm the founder / CEO of AI Spectra, and I will be moderating the panel for today. All right. All right, so now we're just going to go through some speaker introductions. So, Mr. Kashani, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. Hi, guys. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for your time. I'm a serial entrepreneur and a roboticist. I got my degree in computer engineering and studied robotics for my PhD, and then started a few companies. Some of them failed miserably. A couple succeeded, and I was lucky. I made products that are now in thousands, actually millions of homes. And today I'm in charge of a team that's creating robots, and real robots, not boring vacuum cleaners or like manufacturing arms. I'm making like self-driving sidewalk robots that would deliver you food from any restaurant to your home, and they're actually pretty cute. They walk among other people on the sidewalk, or they roll, I should say, because they have wheels, and they have a lot of character. They have names, they have eyes and sounds, and they're doing deliveries right now. If you're in Los Angeles, you can actually probably see one on a sidewalk near you. And yeah, I'm excited to be here.
All right.
Hi.
Ms. Nunes.
Well, hello, everyone. I go by Kai. Ms. Nunes makes me feel like I'm teaching my third grade classes again. So you can read a little bit of my history here. I'll tell you how I got here to begin with. When I pursued my master's degree in human-computer interaction in the 2000s, like 1999 to be specific, I got a minor in artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence back in the Wayback Machine was very different than what it is today. But that served sort of as a foundation for what it was that I wanted to focus on, which is effectively creating a steel thread between augmenting the human experience and really being very, very intentional about creating products for humans and then making the human computer experience better, but then hopefully leveraging artificial intelligence to do that at scale. And so through my career, I've tried to bring all of those sort of like passions together and to bear, and the different places that I've worked, from consulting to where I am today, which is at Salesforce, where I lead a team of researchers. And what we do is we gather data, both usage data, telemetry data, and qualitative data, and we triangulate that data, and we help our product owners and our designers build better products. And in my team, since my team serves our platform products, artificial intelligence actually sits under that domain. Our focus is on voice and on vision and on sort of like research science at scale. So it's a quick introduction.
All right. And then Ms. Guel.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Gell, and I've been in the technology industry for about 40 years now. I started as a programmer way back when I was 19 years old and got in the cybersecurity field in the late 80s during the first worldwide, well, at least US-wide cyber attack. It was called the Morris Worm event. And I was hooked. Cybersecurity is a very exciting field. And the field of AI is bringing a lot of advantages to cybersecurity. It's helping us find threat actors quicker. It's helping us go through millions of lines of log files quicker in events. And today, I've been at Cisco for over 24 years, and my current focus there is I get to think about what future products might be around data security and privacy, which are challenging fields. And we're only going to be able to solve those challenges in that particular field and others with the use of technology founded in artificial intelligence, by whether it's machine learning or natural language processing or deep learning that's going to help us be able to classify millions and billions of files, or be able to triangulate millions and billions of events to be able to find threat actors, or help us automate simple security operations tasks to enable cybersecurity professionals to work on more challenging problems. So I'm excited to be here today with those other great panel members. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, and then last but not least, Mr. Espinoza.
Hi, everyone. This is Pedro. Great being here. And once again, Aroshi, everyone, thank you for the hospitality. I'm from Peru, born and raised. Not sure who's been to Peru here. And yeah, I think the most relevant part of my bio is I'm a venture investor in technology, and I invested in Kiwi Bots, and they do autonomous robots for food delivery. So kind of similar, a little similar to what Ali is doing, and just many cool companies and startups in the area. In addition to that, I've done a couple startups. Several of them didn't work, some did, and we learn from our mistakes, and we grow as human beings and as leaders. In addition to that, today I'm leading a social venture called Pan Peru, where we're empowering low-income rural women from the mountains of Peru to become entrepreneurship savvy, to become more digital entrepreneurs. And yeah, I recently wrote a book about inclusion and equity in technology, and it's called Differences That Make a Difference. So thank you, Aroshi, and everyone. I know that you got a couple books we're going to raffle or something, so thank you so much. All the proceeds go to empowering women in Peru to entrepreneurship.
Yeah, on that note, I just want to mention the winners of the presentation / group project are going to be getting each a copy of Mr. Espinoza's book. So yeah, definitely it's going to be going around, but yeah, all of the proceeds, as he mentioned, go to Pan Peru and all that stuff. So yeah. All right, so we're going to go into the questions portion of this panel. We have a few set questions, but all the participants, if you have any questions, just put them into the chat, or if you'd like to unmute yourself, just put your hand up or something, right? And we'll call on you after the set questions. All right, cool. So the first question is career highlights. How did you get to where you are today? And I think we'll just go in the order of the bios. Mr. Kashani, do you want to start?
Sure. So after I got my PhD, I started a company with a few friends of mine. We were making little smart home devices that help people save energy. And we didn't have any money, we didn't have any investors, but we were really convinced that we are making something that the world needs. About 2 years after we started this, we actually talked to some utility companies that we were hoping would buy our product, and it was kind of the last meeting. Everybody said no to us, and my co-founder and I were talking about, you know what, maybe we need to kind of throw in the towel and you know, take the company down and move on. But you know, I had a little bit more fight left in me. I still wanted this product out there, so we decided to do a Kickstarter campaign. And that was actually successful. We had $300,000 worth of our products sold directly to customers and homeowners. And with that money, we managed to survive, and you know, the company grew to 50 people and started, you know, making millions in sales. And that's when I got fired from my own company. But I really love building stuff. So the day I got my termination letter, I started working on a new idea. And fast forward a couple of years, I had Postmates, which is one of the biggest food delivery companies in the country. They bought that company, and I joined them to start this X division where we are making robots. And today our robots are actually moving around in Los Angeles doing contactless deliveries for thousands of households since the pandemic began, like real contactless delivery. And it's been a lot of fun. You know, I've had many online celebrities, some of whom you might recognize, post about our robots. Our robot has been on Ellen DeGeneres show. It was on the cover of Time magazine last year. And actually just this week, it was on a comedy show with Seth Rogen and Billy Eichner and some other Hollywood stars. So it's been a really fun ride.
Great. So I think we'll just go through all the speakers again. So Yakaira, do you want to go?
Sure thing. I would say that there are 4 variables that led me to where I am today. I'll just kind of rattle them off. Venture capitalism, Star Trek, communism, and temping. And so I'll tell sort of like the interweaving story of those 4 variables in my life and how it kind of brought me to where I am today. Not the journey, but just sort of the like foundational. So my parents were active communists after they immigrated to the United States in the 60s. The rationale that they had was effectively the Dominican Republic and the United States was actually at war with each other. And my father was a prisoner of war. When he came out of that, he was very galvanized to sort of like try to make change in the world. And the place that he ended up landing was after some education at NYU, University of Minnesota, and they had a strong communist ecosystem. Now, communism back in the 70s very much was like focused on building unions, social democracy, crafting a space where you actually are caring for others, like advocating for minimum wage, advocating for anti-racist campaigns and the like. And so I was brought up in that space. And so for me, it became very clear, at least from like the foundation, that doing things and doing good and doing the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people was super important. And that serves sort of as a steel thread for me as I embarked upon my career. With that, my father was also a Trekkie. And so he ensured that I consumed as much Star Trek as possible. So of course, that was a very easy way for me to think about like aspirationally what technology should do for us. And so that vision, not just from a technological perspective of all those advancements, but also for the fact that Star Trek was like wildly diverse and wildly gender balanced. And I wanted that future for myself, so I felt very compelled to try to manifest that through my my education and the way that I brought myself to the world. With respect to temping, I temped for 10 years after I got my undergraduate degree. So I wasn't always a technologist, but I was always exposed to technology at a very young age. So my very first computer was a K-Pro. It had like 2 3.5-inch floppy disks, and then you had to code an M and O BASIC in order to make it work. And I wanted to make it work, so I had to write my papers. So that's what I did. So that was my entree to technology. But in any case, after I graduated from university, I got a degree in writing and in Spanish, and so I could literally do nothing with that. So I ended up temping for about 10 years, and I temped. And I worked in almost every industry, and I worked with every type of computer system, from like an AS400 system to like these crappy Lotus Notes driven systems, or like Act 1, 2, 3. I'm using words that people don't even use anymore. But in any case, because I used so many different systems, it was evident to me that like we were building a lot of really bad technology that was very much focused for a very small use case and user base. And I wanted to be able to make that more accessible to a larger community, kind of like a communist. And so that sort of brings that forward. And finally, the reason that I ended up getting my degree in human computer interaction with a minor in artificial intelligence is because I worked with a venture capital firm that was actually doing a lot of investing in that space, and they pointed me in that direction. They're like, you need to not do this venture capitalism. We'll talk about that later, Pedro. But instead, you should do this. You should go to school, go into human computer interaction, and like try to change the way that we build technology moving forward.
Well, that was definitely something that most people, it's definitely an interesting story. I think most of us, like, since we're like the younger generation, when we hear communist, we automatically think of like, you know, stereotypical version that you see in the Soviet Union, etc. But definitely those kinds of morals and ideals are definitely something that impacts people to do more for their community and outreach. All right, and then I think our next speaker is Michelle. I think you're on mute, by the way.
Sorry. That's a hard story to follow. That is an exciting career path, Kaya. So we have something in common. I was a total Trekkie when I was a youngster, like the original, like the true Trekkie, the original. And Captain Kirk was my hero. and the technology was awesome. So I have an interesting path into technology. In high school, not necessarily in junior high, but in high school, I was always excited about science, right? I took biology and chemistry and physics, and physics was really fascinating and exciting. So when I started college, I wanted to be in the nuclear Navy, and I tried to get into the academies, and that's a whole nother different story. I didn't make it. But so when I went to college, I started studying physics until I got to quantum mechanics and decided that a physics bachelor's was not in my future. But the way I got into computer science was I asked my karate instructor. I was taking karate lessons as an 18-year-old in my first year of college. And I asked him I had a problem with a calculus question. And so he was trying to help me on the calculus question, but he asked me, he goes like, are you taking any programming languages? This is kind of funny because this is like 1980. He's like, in this day and age, which sounds funny that it was however many years ago, 50 years ago, however long that was, not 50 years. He says everyone needs to understand computer science and technology. So, and I wasn't taking, so I took my first programming class in my second semester in college and discovered I had a huge aptitude for it. And of course, it was Fortran. I don't know if it probably doesn't exist. Yeah, giggle, on punch cards, no less. But while I was in college, I took all kinds of programming languages that don't even exist anymore, things like COBOL, although I'm sure there's still some COBOL system. BASIC, Pascal, PL1, APL, Logo. And it was just exciting. And so I started programming at 19. I'm full-time working at 19. For a startup company. It was owned by my karate instructor. But fast forward a couple of years after that company went under, I got a job at NASA Ames Research Center, totally cool place. And I was a lab administrator. And my job was literally to do everything to make coffee for the scientists. Again, this is like 1983, to write the programs that did their experiments. I worked in a vision lab. And so my activities were quite varied. I make the coffee, I'd physically clean the lab, and then I would write programs so they could do their experiments. And that's where the first major computer virus hit that put security on the roadmap, Morris worm. You'd have to look it up in the history books. But anyway, I was hooked. It's exciting. So if you like to watch CI, you like to do puzzles, you like to solve hard things, and that was me. And so 30 plus years later, actually, I think it's like 38 years later or something like that, 30 something years later, I'm still in the field of cybersecurity because it changes every day. There's new threats, there's new technology, the game changes, and especially with AI. I mean, AI is helping the threat actors, right? We have this adversarial AI, but it's also enabling the good guys to better defend their organizations. And that's what I find very exciting about my career, is I get to focus on the latest, greatest technology, what's coming out. And at the same time, I'm very passionate about inspiring the next generation of cybersecurity professionals, and especially young women to get into this field, because it's an excellent field.
Definitely. I think one of the things you mentioned, where how you're always constantly looking at new technology, is something that a lot of people don't really think about when they go into the STEM field. But one thing I've noticed, at least with my parents and all the people that I've met through my very short life so far, is that almost everyone is constantly reading up on new technology, constantly learning. And honestly, my dad, he learned Python like just a few years ago just to keep up with the things. And it's just such an exciting field to be in. So definitely I'm really excited to like motivate more people to join us. And then last but not least, Pedro, would you like to go?
Yeah, of course. I love how everyone's like sharing their family backgrounds too. So I think we can go back to the 80s, and I wasn't born in the 80s. I was born in the 90s, but in the 80s, Peru was going through a lot of like terrorism, and that's what inspired like my uncles and just relatives to move to Tennessee and other places of the U.S. because there was like an extreme socialist party that started murdering thousands of Peruvians. And so that inspired, as I said, my family and my cousins to start getting green cards and moving to the US. And so when I was born in the 90s, I was very thankful because I had that aspiration of going to college in the US, and what helped me a lot was sponsorship and mentorship. And I remember when I was a freshman at Berkeley, at UC Berkeley in the Bay Area, I was literally going to grab brunch, and I see this elderly man wearing a business suit eating at the freshman hall cafeteria. So the first question in my mind was, why is this successful businessman eating with freshman kids? And I remember my mom's advice in Spanish, which is "Júntate con los mejores," which means surround yourself with the best. And so me, like 18, 19-year-old with my sweatpants, I go and walk and I approach this man and I'm like, "Hi, my name is Pedro. Can we grab food?" And his name is Frank. Frank was like, "Sure, like you can sit next to me." And I asked him, like, "Why are you here?" And he was like, "Oh, my board meeting got canceled." And I said, "What board?" And he's like, "Well, I'm a board member trustee at the University of California Foundation." I was like, "Wow, that's so cool." And I see on his business suit, he had an American flag and a Uruguayan flag. And I told him I was from Peru. And he told me he was the ambassador back in the 2000s. And so we clicked. Our conversation from English changed to Spanish. And we became friends, even though he was probably 60 years older than me, different ethnicities, different languages, different everything. But we found that commonality. And a year later, when I started my first technology startup in San Francisco, can you guess who was the first outside investor to write a check? It was him. It was Frank Baxter, the former CEO of Jefferies Investment Bank in New York, former US ambassador to Uruguay under President Bush. And yeah, as I said, just super blessed by sponsorship and mentorship. And in the past 25 years of my career and life has helped me grow as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I actually heard this story a while back, but definitely it's always super funny to hear it every single time. For everyone who's in an audience, I know a lot of you guys are in middle school, but one thing I really recommend is everyone you met today, keep those connections, build those relationships. These people, even though you've only known each other for 2 days, they will be the ones who you talk to about maybe starting your own outreach program, writing articles, things like that. Definitely connect with each other if you have a chance again. But yes, I think we'll just move on to the next question right now, which is future developments. How do you think AI will influence future generations? And then we'll start with Ali again.
Sure. You know, AI to me is just another really powerful tool. If you kind of look back at how steam engine, changed the world, or then combustion and jet engine, every internet, mobile phones, I mean, all these things are a tool, and eventually they're going to disappear in the background and we will forget that they're even there. But right now, it's kind of that early phase where we are so excited about them. And what these tools do is they just help us do more with less. So, if you, go way back when we were moving goods with horses, one person could move like a couple of saddles worth of goods. Now, a couple of people on a giant cargo ship can move 20,000 containers that each have like thousands of products in them. So this is kind of going to be the same trend with AI. It's just going to help us do more with less. And one good example of that is actually the way we are using AI for our robots. If you order food today, one way to think about it is that you're ordering, say, a small, 2-pound burrito. A 2-ton car is going to drive to bring you that burrito. And that's kind of insane. Like, you didn't need a car with airbags and stereo systems and heated seats to show up and give you a burrito, right? You just wanted a tiny little burrito. And we're actually doing this 20 million times a day, just in the US, 20 million restaurant deliveries. And there's other packages and groceries that's not even included. And almost all of them are in cars. So if we actually remove those deliveries off the street, we would get rid of 1 million cars in the US alone, which is pretty incredible, actually. So that's what AI can help us do. We can remove millions of gas guzzling inefficient cars and move small packages in short distances using small efficient robots, just as kind of one example of what these tools are going to help us do.
Definitely. There's a lot of things that you can do with AI to reduce climate change, all kinds of things to help the environment. And I think that was actually the focus of what we talked about today. So that definitely helps to tie in with there. All right. And then I believe next is Yakaira.
Sure. I'd like to be aspirational, and obviously because I'm a Trekkie or come from a line of Trekkies, I hope for the best when it comes to how AI is going to influence future generations, right? That it truly, similar to what Ali was saying, will augment the human experience and will serve us the best when it's most invisible. But I also have a lot of concerns about it augmenting the disparities that exist today. And as such, I feel like AI can influence future generations, but it's up to us and up to the people who are on this call to really make that future AI experience be one that mitigates the unintended consequences, the bad actors out there that help to build AI technologies so that they do good and do the least amount of harm, so that we can have a cleaner community, a cleaner planet, better relationships with each other, and a truly augmented kind of like next version of humanity.
Yeah, I think to add on to that, one of the biggest problems that is in the field of artificial intelligence is that lack of diversity within the people who are making AI, and that leads to a lot of different biases. So definitely talking to everyone on this call, as well as making sure that all of the audience members here, they understand that this is something that you guys can do yourselves. This isn't something that's all the way far out. This is what you can do for your future. It's not like, oh, only people with tons of coding experience can do. This is something that everyone can do. So yeah, definitely good point to bring up. And then I think we have Michelle next.
Yes, and I totally agree with what the previous two speakers said. It's going to be some changes, but I want to answer this in the way, like any technology changes. I think about, so I have a number of grandkids. I have 14 altogether, grandkids and great grandkids. And I think about how they have grown up connected, right? So my first computer, I actually didn't have the first computer I ever put my hands on probably wasn't until college. And I don't know what it was because I was giving a punch card deck and they were putting it in. And then you had the very old PCs with the green, just gonna work on with the green on there. But think about today, kids, I've had grandkids at 2 that knew how to navigate the smartphone to get to their little app where they could drag animals to the train cars, right? They knew how to, I've met a 4-year-old that knew how to download a new game because they're growing up connected. And so we're in the space now because AI has been here, right? AI has been maturing and it's only going to mature more, where we're going to have a generation of kids that have grown up with robots. They have grown up with seeing how artificial intelligence can increase our capacity to do work, right? Our connectedness to do things. And so it'll just be natural for them. They just having a robot deliver their food's natural because that's how they grew up. Having a robot dog is natural because they got one for Christmas and they enjoyed working with it. And building robots was natural because they were in a robotics class and competition. But I think how it's going to influence and change is because since they're growing up with that technology, they are going to be the generation that's going to help us make it better. That's going to help remove those disparities between not enough diversity and understanding. It's going to help us see things in a new light. And people my generation, the baby boomers, right, think differently than the millennials and think differently than whatever we call the 10-year-olds now who are going to grow up on artificial intelligence. And I just can't imagine the types of innovations they're going to come up with, the things they're going to think about doing, because they grew up connected. They grew up with the impact of artificial intelligence in their lives, and they're going to help us make the world a better place, because they're going to do so much more with it than we were able to do here in 2020.
Definitely. I'm actually super excited to see how AI continues to grow within like the next few years, specifically because like there's a lot of new developments that have been happening. So I think it's going to be definitely a fun time for everyone on this call. And then last but not least, Pedro.
Thank you, Roshi. And once again, like I agree with all the panelists, right? The power of AI to automate everything. I remember I was in middle school and I got my first iPhone and I was super stoked. And then I started using Siri. But then talking about inclusion, right, and diversity, which I love, it's very dear to my heart because my mom's an engineer and my sister's a medical doctor. So I was like surrounded by powerful women a long time. And then moving to Silicon Valley, I saw the lack of representation, right? There are more CEOs named John than the total number of female CEOs. And so that inspired me to write a book. But going back to your point, I think it's important to bring equity to who's building these algorithms, right? As Hiroshi was saying, because if the coders are coding, and we all have biases, right? And if there's this bias of a male-dominated technology field or AI field, then unfortunately we're gonna sort of discriminate, right? And like we can see this with Siri, at least in the past few years, like my uncles and my mom struggled with their Hispanic, like Spanish accent when they try to use Siri. And I think AI has many positive effects on the future generations, but also privacy, right? And having that balance, like, because many times they use all of this data to start doing ads and stuff, and just finding that balance. And this leads to the next question, I think, with humanities and inclusion, which is so important.
Yeah. So I think to kind of clarify, since we didn't go over it as much today, but the general bias that is happening due to the lack of diversity, like the products that are coming out of our artificial intelligence are no longer able to work with every single person anymore. Like there's examples of facial recognition not being able to recognize African Americans because the entire data set that the models were trained on was of mainly Caucasian males, right? So this lack of diversity isn't just a problem of, oh, it's not fair to have only these people building, but it's also a problem of everyone who wants to be able to use that product will not be able to if we do not get that diversity. And then that leads to our next question. AI and ethics. Where do we draw the line with AI and humanities? Before we kind of go into this, the main problem that a lot of people are having right now is where do we actually stop between saying, oh, this is okay, it's a computer, it's just speeding up work, and oh, this is replacing a human. This is taking away that factor that makes it human. So for example, we talked about how a lot of artificial intelligence programs are creating their own art and they're creating music and things like that. But what really qualifies as art and music at that point? So based off of this stuff, I think we can just go straight into it. Ali, what are your thoughts on AI and ethics?
Yeah, it's fair. I think if you look at just the last few years, we can kind of see when things go wrong, when we're not thoughtful enough. And you know, the perfect example of that in the case of AI is Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. They use this AI personalization, and you know, bad actors have used them to spread misinformation. And it's not really AI's fault. I mean, AI doesn't have a role in this. It's the humans who are using a tool to do bad things, and it's the humans who designed that AI who kind of didn't think through the potential abuses of it. So my hope is that actually as we get better at AI, we also get better at being thoughtful with our designs and being more thoughtful of how it impacts the society. And that was actually one of the reasons, if I use my own project as an example, we spent a lot of time thinking about, when we're putting robots on sidewalks, who is it going to impact? We need to think about folks who are on wheelchair, because that's the only way they have to get around, or folks who maybe are visually impaired. How should these robots communicate with people and make sure that they get out of their way and not become a problem for them? So in fact, I got invited to give a TED talk about this. If anyone is interested, they can look it up. But I talk about all the things that we had to think about and the ways we decided to solve the problems. But at the same time, I also think that sometimes we might be kind of talking in abstract too much. Like we have concerns that may not even be real. Like there are people who think AI is just going to get to this super intelligence and dominate people like, Hollywood movies. And I can tell you, at least it's my opinion as someone who understands how AI works today, we are far from that kind of reality. AI has intelligence. It doesn't necessarily has autonomy, and those two are different things. And as long as we are thoughtful, and everybody in this call, folks who are going to get into this field, are thoughtful about how we do this, and as we get better at it, I think we can make sure that those unintended consequences are a lot less severe than the benefits that we're going to get from AI.
Definitely. I think it's not as much as the consumer's fault. It's more like we need to work on regulations for how we use AI. And obviously, as you mentioned, I don't think we'll reach singularity at any point in at least our lifetimes. So yeah, definitely things to consider. Kyra, what are your thoughts?
I wonder why there should be a line drawn, right? And I say that because I do believe that we're at an inflection point now where we can really think about the way that we build and use technology to begin with. So we've moved so quickly from the inception of like having, doing the punch cards work of building tech, which is like amazing. My mother did it as well. And I can't even imagine that, like the abstraction of coding onto a card just blows my mind. But in any case, from that point, we had the opportunity then to really interweave the value of what it means to be ethical, what it means to bring something, to automate something, to grow a technology, and then to deliver that technology into the ecosystem. Because technology and technological advancements have been happening for hundreds and hundreds of years. But now we're at a point where it's at scale, where we can really think about how do we change our frame of mind and do a paradigm shift as to how we approach the building of technology going forward. And so why I say, why does it have to be aligned, is that what if we thought differently about the way that we built to begin with? What if we instead said anything that we build has to be imbued with an understanding of the ethical implications, with an understanding of having an incredibly diverse data set to inform whatever it is that you're building, having checks and balances in the development process so that you're not bringing something out that only has, say, one type of test that's executed against it, but has robust testing that from various perspectives, from various types of users, not just diversity of ethnicity and race, but also a diversity of thought, neurodiversity. Like all of those things, I think that if we were able to kind of package that together, then we could really move the way that we're building tech into sort of like the brand new world of tech development, aspirationally. Come back to like Star Trek. I'll keep bringing it back every time I say anything.
Definitely. Yeah. Star Trek, I didn't mention this earlier, but it's also something that I grew up on. So all of these references are making me super excited. All right. I think Michelle's next.
Michelle, yes. I'll just say +1 on your Kyra. I agree on, like, do we really need a line? Because I think that line is going to be different for different people, and we have to take that into an account. And I make that analogy, like today, in the last 5 years, 3 or 4 years, privacy has become a huge consideration and thought and preoccupation in the world. And that's because there's more connected devices, there's more technology that people, that's able to capture our personal information. There's more threat actors stealing our personal information. And so there's like we need regulation. Regulation is good, that helps us understand on the proper bounds for using a technology. Just like there's a law that says, right, you can't drive faster than XYZ on the freeway. Some states it's 55, some it's 65, some it's 80. It's different for the different states. And if we didn't have that law, everybody does anyway, but everybody would just drive as fast or as slow as they wanted. And from the privacy perspective, they created regulation, which is important. But now, as someone that's been in the privacy industry, it's very, very challenging to actually meet the requirements of the regulation, right? The regulation was made, and this is why we need to do this, but actually implementing it is very challenging. So now we're seeing technologists, organizations, large organizations, small organizations, trying to figure out how do we build technology and customer services and provide services within the realms of this technology. And it's a true challenge, one that we haven't solved, and one I think will be years actually solving it. And I think AI actually brings more challenges in the privacy perspective because there's more information captured. Artificial intelligence can go through a lot of files and information and make decisions about that. And so I think it will be hard to draw a line. There do need to be regulations, but I think people will have different levels of comfort, just like the millennials are more comfortable sharing their information than the baby boomers, because we grew up and it's about keeping our information private. And just even taken in the context of contact tracing in the realm of this global pandemic, you have those that are very much, no, I'm not going to share my information. And then you have those who are like, well, if it's for the greater cause, right, if it's going to help somebody, then I'm going to be open about sharing my contact information. And I think we're just going to see the same with AI in humanities. It will be difficult. I think what's important is why I said +1 on your Kyra, is because we need to be thinking about it now. And we need different perspectives. I think the younger generations, like the people on this call, the participants on this call, you have a different mindset on how you're approaching something, but that can be very helpful to help the people that are building technology today think about it that perspective. You just think differently. You grew up in a whole different realm. And so we need to begin today to think about how we can make that a smaller divide between, everything that can be used for good can be used for bad, which is a theorem I've used many times. I'm not the one that founded it, but so we have to learn to do the right thing. We have to take in different perspectives and start building that today. So we don't need a hard line. Right? We can have people choose what they're comfortable with on that different perspective.
I definitely agree with those 2 points where we don't really need a hard line, because that begs the question, who's going to make that hard line? And as Michelle and Yakaira mentioned, there's a lot of different opinions on this, but if we take the approach where we have it, like the checks and balances within the developmental process, and we also make sure that everyone who's creating these products actually takes the time and the effort to consider the ethical implications, I think definitely that will help a lot of the concerns and the problems that people are currently facing with AI. And then last but not least, Pedro, would you like to share your thoughts?
Thank you, Roshi, and great perspectives and words of wisdom from everyone, from Michelle, from Kai. Ali, your TED Talk is really cool. It's like in 17 languages. But yeah, I think what everyone said, like there has to be a balance and there has to be alignment, because I'll give an example. So in addition to Upon Peru, I have a management consulting company with my co-author, and we're writing a second book with an amazing Latina. She's from New York. She's like a star. And we're working with companies like Walmart to Bristol Myers Squibb to Adobe to Oracle. So a wide diversity of Fortune 500 companies. And this is a funny story. One company, and it's not these, but one of the Fortune 500 companies that's very famous, that many people use it every day, they created an algorithm to supposedly bring equity to resumes. Like it would screen resumes, CVs, to make it 50-50 female male. But you know what happened after like 2 months of like trying it? It was actually discarding the vast majority of female resumes. And so the engineers at this Fortune 500 were like, what's going on? We created this algorithm, like this AI-driven algorithm to bring more like inclusion, right? And it turned out that they built the algorithm based on the past data of this company, the past 10 years of their engineering teams. So guess what? You know, from 2005 to 2015, the vast majority of their engineers were male, as Hiroshi was saying, right? These Caucasian males in their 40s or 50s or 60s. And so I think it's very important to bring the soft skills, the humanities, the ethics, the diversity of thought, as Kai was saying, for these engineering teams and for the future of AI. So it's very important to find that balance.
Yeah, that example actually reminded me of, there's this one company who works on screening interviews for people, right? So I think it's called HireVue. So what they do is they take the recording of the person who's being interviewed, and then they start marking down all the facial features and all the reactions and things like that. And they start talking about like, oh, this person seems very nervous, probably not a good candidate, things like that, right? So this obviously sounds a little bit weird at first. Like, yes, it's faster. Yes, it gets things done and you can perceive things that humans can't. But then like all the ethical concerns about like, oh, if we don't have diversity in AI already, how are they making sure that this doesn't happen? Things like that. So yeah, I actually ended up writing a short research paper in the past few weeks on it. So definitely this is something that is really current and relevant to everyone today, even if you decide not to go in the artificial intelligence field. All right, and then I think our last question for today, before I show it, I'm just gonna remind participants, if you have any questions or you want to like unmute yourself or something, just raise your hand or send it in the chat. All right, and then our last question are challenges. We kind of cover this a little bit in the career highlights, but what are some challenges that you faced in your career and how did you overcome them and get to where you are today successfully? And we'll start with Ali.
All right, this is my favorite question actually. And I want to share a personal story with you guys with a couple of lessons that I'm hoping would help some of you. So I grew up in Iran, and when I was about 10 years old, I heard about Bill Gates for the first time. And you know how he kind of made this operating system out of his dad's garage and brought computers to every home. And I was like, that's what I want to do. But the problem is that he already made the operating system. So what am I going to bring to every home? And you know, thanks to Hollywood, I decided it's robots because that's the next big thing. So I had two problems. First, I was in Iran and there was not a kind of tech scene going on there. In fact, I didn't even have a computer. When I first learned programming when I was 11 years old, I had to write code on paper and then secretly sneak into the teacher's lounge where they had one computer, and I would type it in there before someone catches me, and I would see if it runs. I actually got really good at writing code on paper, which is a whole different story. So I did not know a single tech entrepreneur or someone who called themselves an entrepreneur at all. I probably didn't even know what that word meant. And when I looked at the tech world, there was no tech entrepreneur that looked like me or spoke like me. So I had no one to actually tell me, just as Pedro was saying about the value of mentorship and that I did not have anyone to show me the way. There was another problem too. When I was growing up, this idea of American dream didn't really exist. And maybe it was kind of the opposite actually. When I remember when I was 5 and my parents would, you know, like most parents ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I would say, you know, I couldn't decide between doctors and engineers. So I would say, I want to be a doctor engineer. And their response to me was a Persian proverb, "Sang bozorg neshane nazadan ast," which basically translates to aiming high leads to failure. Just kind of Think about that for a second, right? It's the opposite of what you're supposed to tell your kids here, which is you can be anything you want to be. And don't get me wrong, my parents are absolutely wonderful. They're the reason I'm here. They help me get the best education. And here's the thing, not everyone, not parents or anybody else in your life can give you everything in life. They might help you financially, but not morally, or vice versa. It's up to you to kind of find that. So I came up with 2 strategies to solve those problems. First of all, I decided to not tell anyone about my dreams. Because if I told them about my ambitions and they told me something discouraging, it was like a bucket of cold water thrown on my head. So I was gonna keep it secret to myself, and I decided that the only person who needs to believe in me is me. And as long as that's the case, I can keep going. And then the second strategy was, I had no plan. I did not know how to go from a middle school in Iran to being a tech entrepreneur in Silicon Valley making robots. So I decided instead of making plans, I would have a North Star, which is just this dream, this ambition that I have. And then every day, I would just make small steps in that right direction towards my North Star, getting one step closer. Like learning programming when I was 11, or when I was 16, I was reading university level books about like data structures and algorithms. And then when I was 17, I left Iran to go to an American school, and then found a way to apply to come to Canada to a really great school. I applied to a couple of places. A lot of them rejected me, and then one of them gave me admission. And then I sent my application for a visa, which, you know, you have a 10% chance of getting a student visa. And lo and behold, I had a visa. So it's just like these little steps. I couldn't make a plan. I had no idea where to go, but I took these steps towards this kind of big goal that I had. And later on, I actually learned that's the definition of being an entrepreneur. It means that you're in this chaotic environment. You can't have a fixed plan. You don't have all the tools that you need. All you have is this big dream. And then every day you just try to go towards that dream one step at a time.
Definitely. And I actually really like your story about how you set those milestones. Say like 11 years old, you start learning programming, etc., things like that. One of the funniest things, whenever someone asks me, oh, how did you learn to code and things like that? The way I learned to code was when I was back in 3rd or 4th grade. My sister was learning to code. She's 3 years older than me, so she's in middle school, right? And I decide, what if I just learn at the same time as her, right? Just imagine a 3rd grader trying to learn C++, and their teacher is a middle schooler. Definitely awesome. A lot of those things, but I think no matter how young you are, there's definitely something for everyone. I know there's a lot of programs who have been creating languages for elementary school students to start learning, things like that. But yeah, it's definitely something that's very relatable, especially since I grew up in the Silicon Valley. And then I think next we have Yakaira.
Yeah, so I don't think it's going to come to anyone's surprise that the biggest challenges that I faced in my career and continue to face in my career is being a woman and a woman of color in tech. And now adding the extra layer of all of this gray hair, which is not dyed, y'all. There are like 3 areas of potential bias that are placed upon me as I try to be successful and sort of embrace the future state of my career. How this has been manifested, and variable, right? So depending on the environment. With my work, the beginning of my career, I was living in Chicago, and almost every job that I had, there would always be questions as to whether or not I had the education, the intelligence, and the capacity to deliver against the expectations of the role, which were never asked of anyone else. I would be given subordinate tasks like, go get me coffee, go clean my office, when I was brought into an organization to help update their computer system or to help define their order management system, that AS400 system that I mentioned before. This continued when I moved into my consulting career and I was traveling internationally. And even then, I don't know how many times I was mistaken for being a prostitute because I happened to be dressed well and well-spoken, I guess an expensive prostitute, but still working in a corporate environment. And I smile and laugh because, in all honesty, that was the only way that I was able to really take the attitude that was brought towards me and the assumptions that were made about me and what I could bring to the services that I was rendering as a consultant. That was laughter has always been a way for me to kind of manage. And so, like, laugh so much you can't cry is one of those adages, but for me, in all honesty, laughter is not just a defense mechanism, but it's something that really lifts my soul, and I think helps others as well, because you can move past some of the racism with humor. So that has continued to be sort of like a pounding thread, pounding drum beat through my career. And I recognize that in Silicon Valley and here in the Bay Area, it hasn't changed all that much. There's still a lot of assumptions as to what I can truly bring to new projects. I have to do a lot of kind of assurances, use my charm to ensure that people feel comfortable and confident that I can deliver and do good work. And especially in a field such as research and insights, where we are effectively advocating for our user base. There's a lot more work in crafting fluency around what value me and my team bring to the table. And I wouldn't consider that racism as much as it is just sort of like inherent misunderstanding of what the features are and the work is that we bring, and why there is value in actually having a humanistic lens to tech. So what have I done to manage these challenges? As I mentioned, I've weaponized humor to a certain degree. I feel like it keeps me going, but it also just smooths down the rough edges, right? But in addition to that, whenever I hear no, or whenever I hear whenever people dismiss me, or whenever there is a question as to whether or not I can complete a task, my answer to no is not taking no for an answer. So there are always creative solutions around a no. And to me, I always interpret no as being just one step before a yes. So you can unpack the rationale behind a no and eventually get to a yes. And so those individuals in my history that have treated me most askance, even when I was traveling abroad and doing this work and having some of the most egregious things happen to me based on my race and my gender, I've managed to teach and educate and bring people along so that at least I'm an example of why they shouldn't have these biases and why they shouldn't treat people the way that they have in the past. So those are my challenges.
Definitely. I think most of the people on the call have pretty much, not exactly the same, but they face very similar challenges, because most of the people here are female or non-binary and people of color, things like that. So definitely things to talk about, and it's very relatable. All right.
Yeah, it's not, I just want to mention, it's not easy, and there is a lot of trauma associated with it. But the fact of the matter is that, I mean, it helps to recognize that you're not alone. It helps to recognize that there are others out there who have been and have achieved some margin of success. Like, I don't consider myself fully successful, but I know that I'm in a better place than I was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And so it's incremental change. And because of people like myself, it's going to be a hell of a lot easier for the rest of you.
Definitely. All right. And then I think we have Michelle next.
Yes, thank you. So I'll reference two. The first is in my early career, which was a long time ago now. I was just a very quiet person, because a lot of things had happened to me in my childhood. So I people laugh, but I am still very much an introvert. But I was a very hard worker, and I was just very quiet, and wasn't big for social activities or anything. And that had some early impacts, because I think, today it's like, especially with the video technology, which has been around for some time, is engage and meet lots of people, be interactive and networking and all that sort of stuff. So it took me a while to get through that. But one thing that became clear, and I've been in technology long enough that for many times I was the only girl in the room, in my field. And sometimes I'd be in a room speaking in front of 1,000 people, and I could still count how many females were in the room. Unfortunately, it is the gender bias. Assumptions are just made. Like, for example, my official job title at Cisco is Distinguished Engineer, and there aren't very many people. So there's like 70,000 full-time employees at Cisco. There's about 160 distinguished engineers, and about 7 or 8 of those are women. So it's a very small population. And so it seems like it's much harder. We have to, as a woman, and probably as a non-binary, you have to work much harder, it seems, to get to the same level of reward or distinction. And then there's, whether it's unconditional bias or intentional bias, people make assumptions about, because of the way you look, whether it's, you're male or female, or you're Caucasian, or you're a person of color. They just make distinctions. Like, one example that happened in the last couple of years, I was going to, we have full day, we call them D Fellows Community, all hands. We're distinguished engineers and fellows, which is the next level up, and there's only 16 of those at Cisco. We would meet and we'd have discussions. And I always made it a point to be there in person, to sit in the front row, and always make sure that I had something to say that day that people would know I was in the room and that I was speaking up. And so this one meeting, I was a little bit late, and there was the buffet outside, because you had to get breakfast before you go in. So I'm getting my breakfast, and there was a gentleman, non-Caucasian gentleman, and he kind of looked at me like, "Are you going to this meeting?" He didn't think I would be going to the meeting. I took it because he didn't think I would be going to the meeting because I was a woman. And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to." I said, "Are you going to this meeting?" Later, I thought about it. I said, "Well, I should have said, 'Oh, are you refreshing our buffet table?'" But I wasn't fast enough to think about that. But that's just an example of bias that we face. And another real quick example was, I do, well, not now, but I used to do a lot of customer engagements and speak. And I had one print, this was from a different country, I think it was Korea, actually. And there's different cultural biases there, where the sales account manager didn't want me to be the speaker, because he said he wanted someone with a better title, like principal engineer. Actually, principal engineer is less than distinguished engineer. But what he really didn't want was, he didn't want a woman speaker, but he didn't say that. And so I was really angry on the inside. Like, we're on this prep call, and I just thought, and this is what I always do, I'm just going to go in there, do what I normally do, knock it out of the park. My actions will deliver the results of who I am. And that person came back and had a lot of nice things to say about my presentation that day. But I think in terms of overcoming the challenges, it's unfortunate that whether it's women in the field, whether it's non-binary, whether it's people of color, or sexual orientation, we just have to keep doing the things that we do and have an open mindset to help change the challenges in the world. Because we all are created equal, but we all don't get created equal, and we have to work constantly. And I feel, the younger generation coming up with the way that how they're growing up on technology and how they're growing up connected are going to help us make some of those changes.
Definitely. And I also think that people who face this kind of discrimination, right, we are held at a higher standard than people who do not, because, to be honest, without a filter, I have a problem sometimes where I don't think through what I say. And if someone said, "Oh, I don't think you should be a speaker because you're not a principal engineer, blah, blah, blah," I would have been just like, "Oh, then you could make me a principal engineer." And that would not have gone well at all. But yeah, definitely these kinds of things, it will happen eventually. But as long as you know that you deserve to be in the place where you are, and you deserve to succeed, it'll definitely help you. And then last but not least, Pedro.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, well, most of my career was during my higher education. So I think one of the hardest things was balancing college at Berkeley and being an entrepreneur. My college GPA was a 2.6 at Berkeley, and I always share it because I think everyone did way better than me. And just finding that balance, right? And then thankfully, uh, schools were very gracious, and I went to do a program management certificate at Stanford, and then I went to Harvard. But I think just finding that balance of running a company, raising capital, as the other panelists were saying, being a person of color, just different things was very challenging. I think another thing that didn't go as planned was I applied to become a US citizen in 2016 and I didn't get it. So yeah, that definitely changed my forecast of 2016. But then I tried again in 2017. I was grateful. And yeah, I passed all the tests, the civics, English tests in 2017, and I became an American citizen. So now I have 2 passports and super thankful. The US is a wonderful country. Love it, all the economic opportunity, and it opened its doors to my family.
Definitely. All right, so I don't think there are any questions from the participants. I think this is our last call, but other than that, I just would like to take a moment to thank all the speakers for coming here today. I know it's a weekend, and also I'd like to thank all the participants for staying on this program for so long. It's been 2 full days of exercises, presentations, and it's just been a lot. And I know virtually it can get very tiring and things like that. So I just want to mention that we do have like a small gift that we're going to be sending out tonight to all the speaker panels. Not speaker panels, speaker panelists. But yeah, look forward to that. And then everyone who's a participant as well as speakers will be getting a swag box at the end of the program, probably in a month because, you know, shipping, things like that. But yes, super excited. And thank you so much.